Hello, I'm North Hempstead Town Supervisor Judy Bosworth, and I, along with our town board, are proud to present At Home with North Hempstead, a series of special programs for children, seniors, as well as entertainment for residents of all ages. We hope you enjoy this special presentation and check back often for new content.
Hi, thank you for joining me today for another art making session. My name is Marie and I will be showing you how to create this beautiful, simple watercolor landscape. I will provide you some tips on how to use watercolor and provide you step-by-step instructions. So let's get started. The supplies you will need are some type of watercolor. It could be liquid or the tube watercolors. You will also need a flat brush and a pointy brush. You want to get a thin pointy brush. And for the flat brush, you want to try to have kind of like a medium and a small sized one. You want to make sure that, they're not too dry when you're using them. And you will also need a towel paper just for cleanup and some kind of bowl to put water in. It doesn't have to be a bowl, it can be anything really. You will also want to have a pencil nearby just to do some light sketching. Now, when you're looking at the piece, it's really kind of like a flat. It's not that three-dimensional, but I'll be showing you how to do the sunset wash, and then also how to do the shadows and to layer the trees on top of it, and just providing you some quick tips on how to use the watercolor. So we're going to get started by first, doing the sketch and then adding a first layer of paint and then a second layer of paint. All right, so I'm going to do it side by side just so you can see. So the first thing you want to do is you want to create kind of like about 1-inch lines going down, and you're just going to be drawing it lightly on your paper from one side to the other. You want the distance between each line to be about 1 inch, and this will guide us and let us know like when the color should be changing, like from yellow to dark yellow to orange. You want to make about 5 of these lines. Yeah, I think 5 should be enough. And then after you've made 5, that's when you're going to be creating these little hills, right? So the little hills, they are, it's like a hill going down. You kind of want to make a little bit of like curvy lines, when it's going down. And then the second one will be going on the right. You do want them to be touching. This does not have to be like at the center of the paper, preferably somewhere on the left side of it. And, when you're drawing it, it's okay to do, like, you're going to have to probably make a couple lines just to get it right. So, it's okay to be erasing and things right now. You're not going to get a perfect line within the first try. The next step will be to add the sun. Now, you don't have to make a perfect circle for the sun. You really want to make like an oval, and it's going to be almost touching the hill and also the 5th line that we made. Doesn't have to be perfect, just some kind of an oval. So this is what the sketch looks like before we do the painting. We've got the 5 lines, the hills. Obviously, we can't do the trees yet because we have to paint the background first. But having this sketched out will really help us when we're going to be painting. All right, so we're going to start out by using our largest brush. It's about like 1/2 inch. Now, the main thing with watercolor is, you want to make sure that the brush is wet, or else it's really not gonna work at all. That's why it's called watercolor. It really requires water to work. So you want to remember that I usually say that water is your friend, but not your best friend, meaning that you want to make sure that there's always water on your brush, but not too much. All right, so the first color we're going to use is yellow. This is more like a lemon yellow. All right, so once you dip the brush in the water and then put it over the paint, that's going to activate it. All right, so the paint I'm using right now, in its usual like state, it's dry, but when I add water, then it's wet. So as you can see here, when I try to paint it, it's going to be a bit like it doesn't go smoothly, right? And that's because there's not a lot of water on my brush. So you will continuously have to keep dipping the brush back into the water. You don't have to dip the whole brush, mostly just like the tip, and that'll be enough to kind of like help spread the paint around. So as you're painting, you want to be mindful of that you have to constantly make sure that your brush has water on it, so that way the paint can go on smoothly. When you're adding the paint, you really want to move from left to right. That really helps the color to, blend together within each other rather than moving in all kinds of directions. Really just go from left to right and right to left. So what I'm trying to do right now is I'm trying to get the yellow to be dark. So usually with watercolor, within the first layer, it's going to be very light. And yellow is a naturally light color, so I'm not going to get it, to be as dark as a red. So when you're changing colors, you want to make sure that you just swirl the brush around in the water, dry it a little bit, and then put the brush back in the water just to make sure it has some water on it, and then change to your next color. We're going to be using, this looks like an orange, but it's actually a yellow. It's like a, kind of like a yellow orange, right? So that one's going to go next. So what I'm doing is I'm going from yellow to like dark yellow, light orange, orange, and then red. So I'm going from light to dark. You could also do it the opposite way if you want to go from dark to light. So I'm doing the same thing. Another thing is you could do a wash kind of, well, it's called wet on wet technique. Basically, you would add water to the paper first and then, like add the brush over it. That way there's already water on the paper, so it helps the paint move around nicely. You do want to be careful with this if your paper is not like heavy, because if you're not using watercolor paper, the water's gonna rip through it. The next color is going to be orange. This is just like a normal orange. So we've gone from yellow to yellow orange to orange. When I'm doing this orange, I'm actually doing it pretty light. So that's why I'm adding water over it, because I want to make sure that the next color is going to be like the pure orange. I really want to try to create this gradient look. Once again, just left to right and trying to blend the color while it's wet. Watercolor dries very quickly, but you can always like mix over it, because as soon as you add some water over it, the paint kind of just, it becomes wet again, and then you can move it around. So the fourth color is going to be, a pure orange. Also, if you're not doing this with watercolor, you can follow the same, idea, except, if you're using marker, you would just be using the same colors I'm using. It would not have to worry, about like painting, really. So just make sure you're using the lines as kind of like a guide for where the color should start and where it should end. And I'm just trying to paint around the sun. If you go over it a little bit, it's okay, because we're going to paint it with yellow. And when you layer with watercolor, it'll usually go over the color that was there before. So right now, this is what it's gonna look like. My lines are pretty crisp right now. If you want, you can blend your lines. I just decided to keep them like looking nice and sharp, but you can definitely blend all the colors together. All right, so the next color we're gonna be doing is gonna be a red. So you wanna make sure that you're using like just a regular red, not a dark red for this one. Because as a reminder, as we like slowly go down, we wanna make sure that the colors are getting darker. We're going to be using like a much darker red after. And all I'm doing again is just making sure that, the brush is wet. So I keep dipping it back into the water and also into the paint. And I'm trying to blend the red within itself in a way, and just moving left and right. The final color is going to be a dark red. I really want to use the darkest red that you have. And it's just like a small little space in between the two hills that we're gonna fill in, just to give the idea that this could like continue getting darker and darker. And then you want to be careful, when you're painting around the hill, but if you go over the hill, it's all right. No one will really know. We'll just go over it later once it dries. And like I said, within like 30 seconds to a minute, watercolor usually dries. So now that we have the first layer down, We are going to be doing the second layer next after we finish the sun. And then we'll probably move on to, like the hill and everything. And we might do the hill first before we do the second layer. I usually like to do all the layers at once just so I can like see how all the colors kind of like complement each other. So for the hill, all I'm really creating is a shadow using the gray. I kind of want to keep some part of the white of the paper showing and just use some gray. So I'm using a very small amount of the gray, like a very small amount, only because it is pretty powerful and I don't want a dark gray. So I'm outlining, where the hill is. And then what I'm going to do after that is I'm going to add a little bit more water to the brush and blend the dark gray slowly within the white, just to give this kind of impression of like it's like a winter like sunset in a way. If you wanted, you could like make this green or like a dark green, but I wanted to do some kind of winter sunset. And you want to make sure that you're not using black, because sometimes it can get confused between the gray and the black within the watercolor. So you just want to make sure, because if you are using black, it's going to make it look not as soft and not as subtle. So I'm mostly keeping the dark gray on the outer edge of the hill and keeping, like where the insides are, I'm mostly keeping them like a light gray, or just keep the white of the paper there. And you can always blend the colors. Just when you add the water over it, it makes it very nice and easy to blend. So the next step will be to do the second layers. And when you're doing second layers, it's pretty simple. The idea is you're just going over the colors that you had already, except this time you want to make it darker. So we're going to try to make all the colors darker just so that way they can, pop out more. When you're doing the second layer, you don't really want to use as much water, because usually with watercolor, to make the color lighter, that's when you would that's when you would add water. But we actually want to make it darker, so you want to use less water. That doesn't mean have no water on your brush. You just want to be mindful that the brush isn't filled with water. But you can usually tell, because if you see the color getting lighter, that just means you have too much brush, so you got to use more paint. So you want to make sure that you have a lot more paint on your brush this time around. And I'm just doing a second layer. Now, when you're doing, like the second layer of the painting, I would definitely recommend listen to some kind of music while you're working on it. Only because you don't really have to do much thinking right now, so it's kind of nice to have music playing in the background, whether it's like nature sound or something calming. It really helps me, or it could also help you to focus while you're working on this. And I also just find it makes it much more enjoyable just to have like a nice background, some kind of calming background noise going on. And then for the red is supposed to be the darkest part, and it'll probably only take 2 layers, to get like really dark, only because red is naturally a dark color. So I think that should be good. And if your colors are not dark enough, like if the yellow isn't as dark as you want it to be, or the orange is too light, you can always do a third layer or even a fourth one. I don't know if you would need a fourth one, but it's really up to you. The main thing you just want to remember is that the more layers you add, the darker the color gets. So if you want like really dark colors, you just have to be patient and keep layering and layering, so that way the new color builds on top of what's already there. All right. So yeah, I think 2 layers will be just fine for us. And then we're going to be working on the hill after with the same idea, just to make parts of the hill pop out. Because once I add like the black trees, it's going to be competing for attention with the hill, like aesthetically and visually. So I want to make sure that parts of the hills are dark enough to complement, like the dark trees and then the dark red of the sunset. So those are like certain things that you have to think about when you're, like when you're making art, is how the eye is going to view it, and, how the eye is going to make sense of what is going on. So I'm just, once again, mostly making the dark part of the hill darker. Most of the hill is white. It's like the white of the paper, because it's supposed to be a winter scene. And this is, I think I forgot to mention, this is still like the large brush, but if it helps, you can use the, like the smaller flat brush. If it's easier for you to maneuver that brush around, feel free to use that. And then after we're done with the hill, we're gonna move on to the trees and kind of like really bring it all together. So this is what the painting is looking like right now with the second layer. It's looking pretty, there's some nice contrast and everything. After that, I would say we are ready to add the tree, right? So for the tree, I am going to be using the pointy brush. Once again, you want to make sure that you wet the brush first before you start and everything. If you haven't used the pointy brush before, you can always practice like making the lines on a separate paper, just so you can grow your confidence with being able to, use the brush. So also make sure that you don't confuse the black with the gray. In watercolor, they tend to look very similar, but you're going to be using black, not gray. And before you start, just pat the background to make sure that it is dry, only because if it is not dry, then the black will blend into the color, and it's not going to be like a dark black, which we want it to be dark just so it can pop out. So I'm just adding some water to activate the watercolor paint. And you're going to start by making, I have 3 trees. You can have more trees if you want. So I have 1 tall one and 2 kind of like medium height ones. And all you're doing first is you're making a straight line. This line is going to be like the center of your tree. All right. So you want to be mindful of where you're making it, because that will be the center. So I'm going to put 1 more to the right of the sun. Probably, yeah, keep it medium still. And it's just a very thin, thin line, nothing too big, because we're gonna like work on making it bigger later. So right now I'm just outlining how the bottom of the tree would be, how thick it would be, and I'm painting it in. So you can kind of like, use this paintbrush to draw and then paint. If it helps, you can paint with the, the medium brush, if you don't like painting with the pointy brush. If that also makes it go faster and easier, feel free to do that. All right, so now I'm using the medium brush just to make the center of the tree a little thicker, because if we keep it that thin, it's going to look a little weird. So we want to make sure that it's, like not too thick, but just a little bit. And that the bottom is much thicker, just because that's usually how trees are. And then I'm also going to be adding a little bit of shadow to the bottom. I'm adding like, just to give a sense of, well, I don't really know if there could be like a little bit of shadow because the sun is setting. So the shadow is not going to be too like long. It's just going to be kind of short. And then now we're going to be moving on to the leaves. Once again, we are still using black color. When you're making the leaves, it's a diagonal line going down with a little curve at the end, right? So it's like you're making a diagonal line with a curve. So it's a curved diagonal line. And when you're making these, you want to give them some space, like distance apart. And the other thing you want to remember is that the line at the top, like each line underneath the previous one is going to be longer, or you want to try to make it look longer to give the impression that, as you go down, the trees are bigger. I think these resemble Christmas trees. I'm not 100% sure, but the idea is that the line underneath the first one is going to be longer, just to make it look like it's full in a way. So you're going to do the right side or the left side first, whichever you're comfortable with. And then you want to do the same thing on the other side. You will have to make sure that, the brush is wet, because if it's dry, you're going to be able to see that the line it's not smooth. The paint doesn't move around easily. It just means that there's not enough water on the brush. And this is the first layer, so it's okay to make sure that your brush has a lot of water on it right now, only because when we're making these lines, we want it to go smoothly and fast, and you want to move in kind of like fast, quick motion. If you're not comfortable, once again, try it out first on another piece of paper and then do it on the final piece of paper. So this is what it looks like right now. We're going to go back in and fill in the space in between it. But what you want to do is for the next two trees, you're going to be doing the same thing, right? So you start with the short line, diagonal with the curved line. And as you keep going down, the line gets longer. So what I'm doing now is I'm going to be going over some of the lines, but mostly I'm going in between. So I'm trying to make like smaller lines in between the space so that way the tree looks more fuller, right? And when you're making these smaller lines, they can be the same thickness or just a little skinnier. Really depends on you, but it's the same idea. You want to just go in between, two lines that you already made before just to make it look fuller. Right now I'm just going over parts of the hill just to make it pop out so that way it can complement the darkness of the tree. It's mostly like I'm outlining, kind of like you're drawing a bit with the brush, which is kind of cool. You get these really like cool thin lines. So you can, have fun with this and just like make lines wherever you would like really, but what I'm mostly doing is outlining parts of the hill that I want to, like the dark parts of the hills really. So whatever parts you would like to make dark right now, you can go over them. Make sure that there's not a lot of water on your paint. Remember, when you want to make it darker, you want to have more paint and less water. So I want to make parts of the tree darker, so that's why I'm going over parts of the leaves and parts of the tree trunk also, just to make them pop out more. I'm having some fun and just making some kind of like random lines. But it's not completely random because it's only where the, like where the dark gray is. I'm kind of like outlining parts of it and just adding some lines. So this is the final result for the project. I'm really happy with how it came out, honestly. And I kind of like the new one that I just made now than the demo I had made before. I think it's much darker and more contrast. But I hope you had fun and that you were able to follow along. So thank you for joining me. And I'll see you in the next video.